This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is October 2nd, 2012, and I'm interviewing Linda Greever on behalf of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. Linda, you're the longtime owner of the Art Market, one of the first native fine art galleries in the state, and you've continued to handle some of Oklahoma's best-known artists. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
I'm happy to do it. It's a pleasure.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Winfield, Kansas, and grew up on a farm 15 miles from town. Went to a one-room schoolhouse, and it's been a long time ago.
Your mother and dad were both in farming, or?
Right. My mother was a housewife and helped my dad after he was in World War II. And after that, he returned to the farm, and they farmed, and my dad's still on the farm.
Wonderful. What are some of your earliest memories of seeing art?
Well, I went to this little schoolhouse, and the art teacher there, that had been her first job, was to teach in this school, and it had been much larger, but there'd been an oil boom in that area. And the oil field camps, there were lots of kids, and there were 17 in my first grade class, and by the time I got to the fourth grade, there were only 10 children in the entire 8 grades. And so we were just kind of like a small family, but we had an art teacher that came and spent a half a day a week with us. So I always had art from the time I started to school. She was a really wonderful teacher, and she felt like she had ties there, so she worked with us.
Did you continue sketching a little bit, drawing on your own at home? Did you?
I did, but I'm not really an artist. I can paint, but I'm not good at making up things out of my mind. I can copy things, but I'm not an artist.
How about anybody in your extended family? Any artists in your extended family?
Well, not any professional artists. I have an uncle that's a doctor that has, painted always and still does, but not professionally.
How about in high school? Any exposure to art there?
Well, I did take some classes, but actually they were so much less than what I'd had before that they weren't very interesting to me. Because, we started out in the first grade with crayons and drawing, then you went to watercolors in the 3rd and 4th grade, then charcoal, pastel, like in the 5th grade, and then oils through the next 3 years. So we had a pretty good background.
That's a wonderful knowledge, basic knowledge of the different media. How about college? What were your interests in college?
I was a library science major, so it didn't really have anything to do with my art background. And then after I got married and had 3 children and really didn't pursue, I did take some classes when they were small, but I really didn't do anything with art during.
You took some art classes when they were small. Where was this, here in Tulsa?
In Tulsa,
At Philbrook, or?
No, they were at, I can't remember the name of the store. Rathbones, Flair Flowers.
Interesting.
They had classes.
So, what was your first exposure to native cultures?
Well, actually, my cousins were Native American. I didn't ever realize it because there was never anything said about race in my family. It was just you were who you were. But then when I moved to Oklahoma, there was a lot more Native American things that went on, and after I bought the art gallery, I wanted to be able to handle the best of the best, and the thing that we could get the very best of us here was Native American art. So that's what I decided to specialize in, and that's how I've gotten as well acquainted with Native American people and art as I have.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how you initially purchased, as I understand, the gallery business from another owner.
It was called the Art Market, and it had been in business 6 months. The people that started it were employees of Sears, and their wives had started the gallery, and it was imported oil paintings. And
What
why I
style?
did this, I don't know, because it wasn't the best idea, because the people that were interested in art came in, new gallery, and that's what it was. So, the over your sofa type of painting, and we stretched hundreds of oil paintings, but that's not what I wanted to do.
So European, mainly European
They were all
artists.
starving artist type paintings. Yes, they were.
I understand you made the acquaintance of Ben Harjo and Robbie McMurtry pretty early on, while you were still sort of selling the
I did.
European.
Actually, the first Native American artist that really talked to me about getting started in was E.G. Thompson. And I met him at the Children's Medical Center show that they had every year at the fairgrounds. And he started coming in, and he helped me organize my first art show, which there were 4 artists. And it was him and Ben Harjo, David Williams, and David Stevens. And that was the first show that I had.
Does that mean were you sort of collecting a bit of native art too before
I had
you
collected before then.
before you opened?
Not a great deal, mostly baskets.
Mm.
I have some really nice older Cherokee baskets by people like Ella Mae Black Bear and some of the older artists that's what got me interested to begin with.
So what was that first art show like?
Well,
And this is 1976, right? When you opened?
74, I believe.
74.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't David Stevens. It was Robert Ansley was the
Okay.
4th artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
David.
And then about that time is when I met Robbie McMurtry and several others. I've found through the years that other Native American artists are very supportive when we have shows, and several came to the showing, and I got to know them from that, and developed working relationships with them.
Was the turnout good on the part of the public?
It was pretty good,
You had advertised?
I'd done newspaper and direct mail, and yes, I had advertised radio, I think.
So your children were still fairly young, right?
I purchased the gallery when my youngest child started kindergarten.
How did you manage to run a business and
Well, it wasn't always easy.
take care of kids?
But, they grew up in the gallery. I'm always amazed at how many, because when there's an art show or something, why, I'm busy, and the artists spent a lot of time with my children that I really didn't realize how much time and how many stories they shared.
Yeah, I know they've many of them become good friends with the children as well. Who are some of the artists who sort of got their start in your gallery that really hadn't been showing much other places?
Well, like Ben Harjo, Kathy Henderson, Robbie McMurtry, trying to think. There have been Merlin Little Thunder. He told me that I bought his first painting when he came to Tulsa. I didn't realize that. Bill Rabbit, he came to me and asked if he could be in my show, and I said, well, I guess it'll be all right. And then that was in 1980, and he said many times since then that he was so shocked when he got there, and he had just started, and all the other artists were well known, because in the late 70s and early 80s we had some really fantastic shows. We would paper the front windows on the gallery and close for like 2 or 3 days before an opening, and then people would line up in the parking lot waiting to get in. times have changed a lot.
That's wonderful.
But there were some wonderful artists. I worked a lot with people like Woody Krembo, Solomon McCombs.
Did they come into the gallery, or did you meet them at
They came
other
into
shows?
the gallery. They came to the gallery a lot. In fact, my oldest daughter had thought about doing her doctoral thesis on Woody Krembo, and you know, the kids grew up with these people. They were very important.
So, I'm not sure that, you know, the habit of having shows was really particularly that well established. Having receptions, having shows was kind of new territory, wasn't it?
It was new territory, and when we first started having shows, there really weren't any other shows around. I mean, the Philbrook Annual was wonderful, but that was about the only Native American show around. Then when the economy started going down in the late 70s, every little organization had Native American art shows. And so then our shows became less special because people were used to them, and they have gotten, you know, less and less viable for the gallery.
But in those early days, like you say, when there were only the competition shows, and that was sort of the only game in town, and you were buying from the artists, but were you planning multiple shows sort of to help the artists out? Because
I did. I had, at that time I was having 4 shows a year, which was a lot. And, you know, like I said, we'd have real large crowds of people. And it was always fun and entertaining, and I'd have as many as 35 artists at a show sometimes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Did you also, in addition to artists coming into the gallery, did you also visit other shows and sort of find artists or recruit artists a bit?
I really didn't I did go to other shows because I was interested, you know, in meeting people, but mostly the artists came to me. I mean, it seems to get around if there's a gallery that handles Native American art, and especially one that buys, you know. But there have been a lot of galleries in town, but I guess I'm stubborn. I've stuck to it longer.
Come and gone, and
Yeah.
you've endured. Did you go to any of the Philbrook annual
I sure
shows
did.
during the?
I did go to the Philbrook Annual. In fact, I used to volunteer, and I worked with the reject room. They used to have.
Tell us about that.
They used to have a room at Philbrook that when they had their show, when the artists sent their work in or brought it in, there was a place on their paper to check if they were juried out, did they want their artwork to be for sale in the reject room. And it was a wonderful thing. A lot of artwork was sold out of that reject room, and I've always wondered why other museums and other places didn't do that, because it really, you know, artists that didn't quite make the grade for the show still had an opportunity to sell, and of course that increased the crowds and, you know, was real helpful.
So it was partly about making the grade, but was also part of it if they were doing something that was sort of outside the boundaries of what the annual was open to at that time, or?
Well, the annual really was pretty widespread. I mean, they were originally, back in the early days, why, you know, Indian art was pretty much flat style. That was pretty much it. But as it progressed, Philbrook progressed also, and they, you know, their show was remarkable. It was the best known Native American art show in the country for many years, and it always made money for the museum, and they had a different curator who just decided he didn't want to do it anymore, and they quit having an invitational show at that point.
Did that impact the gallery, do you think?
Not that much, no. People that are interested, you know, that are collectors, will find you. I'm still surprised after 37 years in the business that every single day someone comes in and says, I didn't know you were here. And, you know, we've advertised a lot and word of mouth, and you would think that everybody in Tulsa would know we were here, but they don't.
Do you remember what was going on at Gilcrease at all during the 70s, maybe early 80s?
They had very little interest in Native American art at that time.
Once the city had acquired the,
Right.
of course they had had it since the 50s.
They didn't have Native American art shows or anything like that. They just really didn't have an interest in it at that time. Since then, they've developed a lot more of an interest and have acquired some wonderful things.
In terms of some of those early artists, David Williams and Woody Krembo, are there a couple of artists who really stand out in terms of having sort of, you know, brought a lot of information to you about Native art and the history of Native art, etc.?
Well, Woody Krembo was a major influence because at that time he was the best known Native American artist in the world. Part of it was his marketing strategies, but he, you know, still to this day we get inquiries from the internet every week wanting to know values and things on Woody Krembo's silk screens. And he was amazing, and he was so interesting to talk to because he knew so many things, and he had beliefs that were different than mine, but he taught me a lot of things.
What were some of the marketing strategies that were so successful?
Well, actually he was kind of a genius. He quit painting in the right around 1950 and did not paint again until like 2 or 3 years before he died. And the reason he stopped was he said that there were 2 ways to become famous. One was to die, and the other was to quit painting. And so in order to get his artwork to appreciate and value, he quit painting. But he contacted libraries, museums, universities, and he built these wooden cases, and he had sets of silk screens and sets of etchings that he would send out. He also had some offset reproductions, but he would pack these cases up with one of each and send them out to wherever it was that he was wanted to have a show, and they would show his work for a month to 2 months, and then whatever was left they'd pack back in the case and send him the money and pay him, and he'd fill the case up again and send it out. So people all over the country knew Woody Krembo's work. And he had this wonderful silkscreen studio out in New Mexico, even though he was an Oklahoma artist and was from here, that they did the best silk screening of any place, you know, because at that time it wasn't photo silk screening, it was hand cut screens, and you know, they were really exceptional.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I had not heard that. I know that you dealt with Willard Stone quite a bit. Can you describe how you first encountered his work?
Oh, I guess probably through the Phil Brooks show, and then he came to see me and brought some of his work. I sold a lot of his work through the years, and one of the first things that I remember selling where he carved some gun, I guess the butts of the gun, I don't know what they're called, but anyway, he carved a number of those that I sold to different people for their guns, and then of course regular sculptures. But he was delightful to work with. I remember being at his house the day that they shot the president, was it Robert
Kennedy?
No, it was.
Oh, no, that's
was
too
it
early.
Yeah.
Reagan?
They tried to assassinate Reagan, wasn't it? At that point, looks like I could remember. But anyway, I was there that day, and Willard was so upset about it. We all went in and watched television, and watched all the goings on for several hours. But it was a, you know, it was something to see how he was very patriotic, but not necessarily political. You know, he supported whoever was in office, like we all should.
How did your gallery business kind of change from the 70s to, well, by the end of the 80s?
Well, things had slowed down a lot. You know, there were some real close years that, you know, that we struggled, but, you know, we've always managed to scrape by.
And did the artists also change?
Yes, I would say they have. There are very, very few flat style artists anymore. Most of the artwork is European style, and the flat style took so much time, and people didn't understand it a lot. You know, I'd have someone come in and say, look at a beautiful piece of flat style work and say, I could do that, or my kid could do that in the 3rd grade. They had no idea how difficult it was to do the color against color, no blending, but to achieve the results. And you hardly find any of that anymore. I'm always real excited when I find a nice piece of flat style art. And the other thing is, back when I first started, it wasn't unusual for me to have things with house paint and oil, and then it turned more into acrylic and gouache instead of the early painters mostly used tempera, and now they mostly use acrylic. It's a lot easier to use than the tempera was to achieve the same results.
You've been asked to judge art shows also. What are some of the challenges of being a judge?
Well, the fact that I'm not native, and I get a lot of criticism for that. Not necessarily from the artists, but from, people saying, well, what does she know? And, I don't always know. And I try to judge on the quality of the work and the historical accuracy of the pieces. And, I don't hesitate to ask people that know the history, because I think that's real important, to be sure that the regalia is correct and the time period's correct and that sort of thing, because nobody knows everything.
Do you prefer to judge by yourself or in committee, or? Oh,
I like to do it with other people. Then you have a chance to discuss things. And like just recently, I judged. I've had several shows this year, but at Five Tribes Museum, and the person that won the People's Choice Award was a little upset because, as judges, we didn't give him an award. And the reason we didn't was because his work was not Five Tribes. And that, I like to, when I judge a show, I want to see that the artist has worked toward that show. They haven't just stuck something in there because they had it and wanted to enter a show. And you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of galleries sort of have, they can have a visual art focus or a sculpture focus. It seems to me you've always sort of dealt sculpture from the beginning.
Well, not really, because I've always thought that we were more paintings. But, I've always done both. Parker Boydell was a wonderful addition to our gallery, and Will Wilson and the Crow Brothers, and, I've dealt with a lot of sculptors too.
The Chattlesons, yeah.
The Chattlesons, oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they, Sherman paints mostly now. Allie does the sculpture, but. Mm-hmm. So many of the artists are gone that I've worked with, like for example, Parker Boydell, Bill Rabbit,
Mm-hmm.
Robbie McMurtry, Woody Krembo.
What was one of your most rewarding or unusual relationships with a collector?
Oh my. You know, my friends have all developed mostly through the gallery because that's where I'm at all the time. And I've done a lot of trips with collectors and
To look at art or just...
well, just, yes, partially to look at art, but also just because we'd say, well, it would be fun to go to Santa Fe, or it would do, you know, that kind of thing. And I've also done those things with artists. So.
Yeah, I know that's been a big part of your life. In 1990, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was passed, and wondering what impact that sort of had on the native art scene in your opinion.
It had a huge impact. At that point, that was when we really slowed down as far as sales, because there was so much bad publicity about that people were saying they were native when they weren't native, and people were afraid to buy things because people didn't have their cards and that sort of thing. And we lost a number of very good artists through that, because there were some that, even though they were raised native and had native relatives and all this, they didn't have their cards and they couldn't prove it. And the Arts and Crafts Board and the Attorney General's office were really on top of that and watched for everything. And the head of the Arts and Crafts Board came to my gallery and went through, and they passed me. I passed with flying colors. In fact, when the lady got back, she ordered a painting from me, and I thought, well, hey, that's nice. Also, I did go and speak in front of Congress when they were working on that bill, and that was an interesting.
Did you go with some native artists too, or?
Well, they held the hearings in Oklahoma City, and I went to Oklahoma City and spoke in front of the Congress, which was kind of scary.
Yes.
But I was happy that they asked me.
What did you say?
Well, I said that I felt like the bill and the new law had kind of split the industry, and that we needed to pull together and get back. While I knew the purpose of the bill was to do away with the things that were coming from China and Japan and other countries, what it did in Oklahoma was divided the artists, and that it made it very difficult for a lot of people.
When did you establish your gallery in Muskogee, and what kind of led you to open another gallery there?
Well, I think it's been I know it's been 12 years. I go by the age of my grandchildren, and I had one that was 2 at the time. So, but the reason I opened it is because Muskogee had always been so active in Native American art. There were so many good artists from that area and from that region, and the only frame shop in town was closing. And so the lady that had that frame shop talked to me about it and suggested that I open, and there was a building right across the street from where she was, and so I went ahead, and she was losing her lease. They were tearing down the building. That's why she was quitting. And so I leased that and was there. I've made a move in Muskogee. I'm in a different location, but I'm still there 12 years later. We do all of our framing there because we have so much more room.
You've also spent a lot of time appraising art in the last decade or so. How has your appraising impacted your art business?
Well, the appraisals have supported the art gallery a lot of times because there are always appraisals to be done, and I do as many as time allows. And in fact, I spent Sunday down here working on appraisals this week because that there are not that many people that do it, and I enjoy it. If if people will be patient until I can complete things. But that's my only problem. There's not enough hours in the day.
You also, do you continue to do the free appraisal day at the Gilcrease Museum?
They haven't had one for a long time. I did do that in the past, and also at Philbrook and at the Jewish Museum. I've done a lot of those.
What prompts you to volunteer your time?
Oh, usually somebody asks me.
Have you seen any interesting things?
Oh, I've seen a lot of interesting things. You hardly ever go to an appraisal without learning something and seeing something that you're interested in. This afternoon I went, and the man had 4 very large old Indian blankets, chief's blankets, that you don't see very often, and they were absolutely beautiful. I was excited.
I've noticed that the secondary market seems to be really booming these days. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's the economy, because the people that had money still have money, and they tend to spend it more on the more expensive and better, not necessarily better quality, but more collectible things that used to be. We sold a lot of prints and frame prints and things like that. We hardly ever sell those anymore. We do sell the originals a lot more often than we do prints anymore, and that's just a sign of the times. Because the people that used to spend $200 are spending it on their kids' lunches, not pictures. We had a lady in this week that she was in her golf clothes, that she'd been playing golf, and she had been to Oklahoma City the day before playing golf and everything, and she looked around at artwork, and then she said, well, her price range was more like $40. Well, it's hard to do something nice these days for $40. It just showed that that's her, it's wherever your interest is.
Well, I guess I'm thinking too that a secondary market, pieces that have already been purchased and they're being put up for resale, sort of shows that collections are changing hands, or...
Well, it kind of goes on a rotating basis. As people die, their objects come for sale again, and a lot of times there are things I've sold 3 and 4 times through the years that are very, very nice pieces. But families, maybe the children can't afford to keep them, or they are not interested in them, or people retire and they want to clean out their offices, and we get things back
come back to you
to sell again.
Have you noticed any other trends in the market today?
Well, there's really nothing new under the sun. You get a new set of artists that think they're doing something brand new, and occasionally there is something new, but most of the time, if you really check into it, it's been done before. But the quality, it's still, the quality is the most important thing, and the originality.
Oklahoman Native artists have really, relied on galleries to purchase their work, and this purchase has made a real difference in whether or not artists could devote their time and energy to their art. But they're also risky for the gallery owner. How do you decide what kinds of work to purchase? How do you choose one piece over another?
I primarily go by quality, because and I'll have to admit that I've bought some things because the people needed to sell, and if I had the money, I felt like that was what I should do. I can't always buy, but when I can, I do. That's one of the main difference between Native American art and and other types of art in the country is because most art galleries do have mostly consigned work, and Native American artists, because they've needed it to survive, and the galleries normally buy Native American art.
And I think Oklahoma really does a better job than other states too.
Mhm.
How important is it for you to know a lot of cultural information about the artwork?
It's pretty important. I mean, I always try to talk to the artists about it and know the stories behind the pieces. Sometimes it's hard to give all that information to your employees. Jerry, that's here now, is really good about that, and he's Native, and mostly through the years I've had Native employees that do, a lot of times they know more about it than I do.
And sometimes a number of times you've had artists too. What are the pluses and minuses of having an artist work part-time in the gallery?
Well, you know, it depends on the artist. Some of them just want to sell their own work. Some of them don't ever even mention that they're an artist. But generally, it has worked out fine.
How important is it for you to give feedback to the artists on their work when it comes to style or technique?
I don't do a whole lot of that. I have to be really close to an artist before I will make any comments about their work. I have, you know, and then I don't do it very often because you're kind of walking on eggs when you do that. But if I can look at a piece of art and realize, boy, there's something really wrong going on, I might, you know, say, is there a problem? What's happening with you that this isn't your usual quality or something? But normally, if an artist brings in a piece, I ask them what their price is, and they tell me, and I say either yes or no. There's no dickering, because that's a no-win situation. You know, I can either afford it or think I can sell it, or I can't, you know.
And I was wondering if you'd ever offered any just advice or feedback about marketing and pricing, which is kind of tricky.
Well, I have to a certain extent. Mainly, I used to go to Bacone and teach a class each semester to the students on how to market their work and how to show it, you know, to a gallery, because that's something that's not normally taught. And an artist goes out to sell their work and they don't have a clue sometimes how to go about it. And it's real important to discuss with an artist how you expect things to be done. Because I asked an artist to leave the gallery last year because they were bringing things in and giving me the price, because the artist always sets the price on the artwork. And this happened to be an artist that was willing to consign. He was fairly new, and I always tell them that if they want to have work in the gallery, they need to keep their prices level, because if they take it out and sell it somewhere else, they should get paid for selling it, just like I get paid for selling their work. Well, this artist had 2 tickets on their pieces. They had a thing across the corner, and on one side they had the price that I had to sell it for, and on the other side they had the price they were selling it on the street at the shows they'd been doing. And I said, you know, why would you do that? And they said, well, we were just trying to recycle. But we can't do that. It's really important. It makes us look real bad. And we do work for our part.
Right. So how long did you teach that class? That sounds like an interesting class.
At Bacone?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I don't know, 10 years probably. A long time.
Yeah.
They changed.
Each semester? Or
I just go one day, you know, each semester. But I enjoyed it. And it was interesting.
Did you acquire any artists that way too?
I don't know that I ever did. I know one of the interesting things that I have to laugh about now, I didn't think it was funny at the time, was that Dick West was there. And he wouldn't speak to me in English because I was a white woman in the Native American art field. So it's funny now. I didn't think it was very funny then.
Well, who brought you in? I guess you didn't.
Ruth Jones and Janet Smith, and I was there through several of their art instructors.
You've had a few health challenges since your accident. Now, was that 3 years ago, or yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone else might have just said, "Forget it," throw in the towel. What has kept you going?
Hunger. No, I could qualify for disability, but I don't want to be disabled. I want to do everything I can. I love the business, and I have a lot invested in it. And what would I do if I didn't have the? I mean, I could stay home and watch television, but I did that while I was disabled there for a little while, and that's not a lot of fun.
What are a couple of things that you really that make your work worthwhile to you?
My work?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is fun to go out or have people bring in interesting things every day. Some things I know nothing about, and I say, "I'm sorry, you'll have to go to Michael O'Shea or someone else." But I get to see so many just wonderful things. Really do love it. And the people are nice. People come in here mostly because they want to purchase, or they want to, they'll just come in to look around. People say, well, they like the atmosphere of the artwork. And, people are always welcome. So I enjoy visiting with people, and that's why I have to work weekends, because I spend too much time visiting with people.
As you mentioned, there have been several galleries in Tulsa and Sapulpa. At one time there were, I think, almost maybe 4. Is it more desirable, do you think, to have more galleries? Is there anything you miss about that, or?
I don't know whether that's more desirable or not. Competition's always good. The thing that has happened so many times and through the years is a gallery will come in and stay for, a year to 10 years, and then they go out of business and dump everything on the market. Well, then that really hurts business and hurts the artists and everyone connected with it.
Right.
Because that messes with the value.
Have you ever gone to auctions or things like that and tried to sort of, protect the artist's prices by sort of buying things?
I have done some of that. I've bid things up sometimes because it's just, but I don't go to auctions very often because I hardly ever get anything at an auction, because if I bid on it, people think, oh, that must be worth something she knows, and so it's not any fun.
She's a gallery owner. We've also talked about how you purchase things, and but once in a while, even though you accumulate a lot of inventory, and I think everybody does, that sometimes they're not always moving, but once in a while you'll sell a piece that you've really sat on for a long time. Do you have any good stories about that?
Well, I was telling somebody this week, they were looking at a very large Mopoke painting, and it's just beautiful. And I said, well, my price on that is firm, because it's worth what's on it. And I said, I don't have a lot in it, so I can afford to sit on it, because this young woman came in, and this has been at least 5 or 6 years ago, and she had worked in an office, and they were closing the office, and her boss had given her the opportunity to buy some artwork for just very, very little money. And so I had bought several things from her and paid her reasonable prices. And she came in with this mopope and said to me, it was out of the frame, it had fallen out of the frame, and she said, I'll take $100 for it. And I said, sold. And I paid her the money, and then she said, well, I want you to know I just paid $1 for that. And I said, well, lucky you, but the piece was worth $10,000. And I don't ever ask people to come down, but if somebody walks in and tells you, I want $100 for this, how can you say no? You might feel guilty, but how can you feel? And, she was happy, and I never told her, because why? She was happy, and I was happy. If I have to live with that the rest of my life, I'm still happy.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which was, most gallery owners have a personal collection that they just don't want to part with, and how important has it been to you to keep some of the pieces over the years?
It's been real important. Mostly, I have things that I've purchased that I have kept, and then I have a lot of gifts that people have given me that are really, I don't sell gifts. And about a year ago, my house was broken into, and a number of things were stolen. A number of my paintings, and I was able to retrieve most of them by calling. I figured out who had stolen them and calling around, and part of them the police confiscated, and then another gallery had bought a number of them, and I bought them back from them rather than cause hard feelings with another gallery. But I was really happy to get those pieces back because they did mean a lot to me.
You've had a pretty good relationship, I think, with some of the tribal museums around here, too. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I've mainly worked, with the museums in this area. Well, with the Cowboy Hall of Fame and Gilcrease, Philbrook, and Five Tribes Museum and Shaligee Museum. And
is it both for when they're acquiring acquisitions and appraising, or
both? I've done a lot of appraisals for all of those museums. The Creek Council House. Whenever they ask, I usually, I don't go to them very often because I think that's, if they, they have a lot of people coming to them.
To market work.
Yeah. And I don't want to interfere with the artists selling their own work. When I do sell to a museum, it's usually for deceased artist work because they don't have the opportunity to find those other places.
Are there any other things you'd like to talk about? Something that we've forgotten to address about gallery business?
There are ups and downs.
What would you say to somebody who was thinking about going into the gallery business?
You really have to love it and be willing to put the work into it. I think a lot of people think there's really nothing to gallery work except just walking in and looking at beautiful things. There's a lot of elbow grease behind the gallery work. Especially, like I said, I do the appraisals and the framing to help the gallery, and we do a lot of picture framing. I'm always glad to do those things though, because I need a little release of working on hammering something or doing something once in a while.
That physical labor. Looking back, what's been one of the high points of your career so far?
I guess as I've, been in it so long that I do get some some acknowledgement of the time that I've spent in it, because so many times, people don't appreciate things. Like the rugs I was looking at today, I said to the man there in his office, and I said, isn't it amazing how many people come in that have no idea? And he said, yes, but he said every now and then someone comes in that really appreciates it. And we talked about that, because it's great when people really enjoy what you do and what you're doing.
How about a low point in your career so far?
Just when times are hard, and the time of the Indian art law, when, artists were so unhappy and pitting themselves against each other, and they were all my friends, then it was hard to tell people that did not have their cards and things that they weren't, that I really couldn't carry their work as much. Some of the artists, I was able to, because they had shown for a long time, I was able to grandfather them in, but some of them, I couldn't. And when I have a new artist, I like to spend time with them talking about their backgrounds and to know whether or not they really, because just because they have the blood doesn't mean that they necessarily know their background. And that's what's really important.
Know their culture.
Know their culture. Uh-huh.
All right. Well, if you don't have anything else to add, we'll go ahead and take a look at a couple of pieces.
That'll be fine.
What can you tell us about this piece?
This is a piece that Bill Rabbit did in 1980, and that was his grandfather, who was sitting on the porch in front of the hills with a crystal in his hand. His grandfather would foresee things with the crystal. And that's what the painting's all about, which I think is really neat. He said that, he can remember his grandfather sitting on the porch. And that's a piece that I had at home, because Bill quit doing that style shortly thereafter. And it was always my favorite style of his.
Right.
It was so different from what anybody else did, and, was what he became known for to begin with. This is a Parker Boyle painting of Mother Earth. He did a number of the Mother Earth paintings. Some of them were nudes, where he had the mountains and the hills and the valleys. In fact, the first time I met Parker, he was at an art show in Oklahoma City. He'd been invited to do the show, and when he got there, his Mother Earth painting was not hung. And so he asked them about it, and they said, well, it wasn't appropriate because it had the nude female. So he stayed through the show till the end of the evening, and then he packed up all of his work. And as I was sitting out in front of the building as he left, and started talking to him, and then we worked together the rest of the time till he died.
Oh, that's how you first made your acquaintance.
That's how I first met Parker, was he was carrying out his, and while I worked with him, I sold a number. He was one of the few artists that really did the erotic Native American art, and really we sold a lot of it to people. I was always surprised, but it was, it wasn't terribly obscene or anything, but it was more erotic, and people did appreciate it. And actually, he has paintings and sculpture all over the world. He did most of the animals on the Tree of Life at Disney World. And he did the big sleeping bear that's the center of the Disney theme park in California. So people recognize his work, that don't know anything else about Native American art.
Right. How about this painting, Linda?
This is a Terry Saul painting. Terry is the only one of the master artists from 5 Civilized Tribes that I really did not know. He died he was the first one to pass away from that group. He was Choctaw and Chickasaw. And this was a painting that he did for a bank just south of or just north of Bartlesville. It hung in a bank building, and when the banks started going under, I bought this piece. It's a buffalo hunt piece, which is
It's really nice.
really a beautiful large piece. And Terry was the art director at Bacone College for a number of years. And there have been a lot of really good artists that studied under Terry Saul. He turned out some really good students. I know Joan Brown has commented that he was a major influence in her art career.
All right, how about this piece?
This is a Bremen Echo-Hawk piece. Bremen was Pawnee. He lived in Tulsa the last part of his life. He was a big war hero, and he liked to tell his stories about it. He did a lot of covers and backs for Saturday Evening Post and Look and Life, and he was known all over the country for sure, possibly the world, but people in Oklahoma really didn't know Bremen. He didn't market his work here.
He sold mainly in New York and places like that.
He sold out of New York, and he was, he was delightful. I got to know him fairly well, and he was a funny, entertaining person. This particular piece is a dance, a Christmas dance, and one of the interesting things about it is that they're having such a good time here. Well, when I was researching this piece after I purchased it, because Bremen was dead by then, I found another painting that was probably 2 hours later of the same group of people in the same room, and they were fighting, and the guns were going off.
Oh,
and I thought that was so interesting. I wish I knew where it had been published.
Yes, that's...
Bremen did a lot of artwork for Leaning Tree, the cards and the calendars and things that people have had in their homes all through the years. But he was best known for his magazines.
It's just a superb piece.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate you doing this, Julie.